Autism Quality of Life podcast, episode 17.
I actually enjoyed my time with him and I don't want to leave. And it was such a great feeling.
Welcome back to another episode of the Autism Quality of Life podcast. Today I have with me Derek Volk. And Derek shares his experiences raising a son on the autism spectrum. And both Derek and his son Dylan write about the challenges, triumphs, and coping strategies from the early days to the adolescent years to life in the real world when Dylan is a young adult. Their book showcases the unique relationship between a father and his son who has spent his entire life chasing the rabbit. Derek, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. So I have to ask you, how did you come up with the title for your book, Chasing the Rabbit?
Actually, I was about halfway through the book and I had no title at all. Hadn't even really thought of a title. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I remembered an analogy that I used to use when Dylan was younger. And it was that Dylan is like a greyhound. And if you've ever seen a greyhound race, the dogs come out of the chute and they chase this mechanical rabbit. And they never catch the rabbit. They just run after it. And they'll run as hard as they possibly can to try to catch this rabbit, which, of course, they never catch. An analogy that I always use is that Dylan is like that greyhound and the rabbit is normal. And he's constantly chasing. He sees it. He knows exactly what it looks like. He just can't get there. It's always just out of reach. And it's a very frustrating way to go through life. And so in the middle of the night, I literally woke up and was like, that's it, Chasing the Rabbit. That's the name of the book. And I never wavered on that. I was like, that is definitely going to be the name of the book. And so it's worked out well. And I've actually heard some people use it in other situations that they've said, oh, my son's chasing the rabbit. And I was like, huh.
Wow.
I kind of invented a little description. And people sometimes, when we do our presentations, I always start by talking about the name of the book. And sometimes I see, especially parents, educators, they kind of tense up when I say that Dylan's not normal, especially when he's like 8 feet away. But Dylan doesn't see that as, people think that that's an insult. He doesn't see it that way at all. He knows he's not normal. And he talks about that. He says, you know, when you're 8 and your goal in life is to score the winning soccer goal for your soccer team, that's normal. When you're 8 and you've memorized the wingspans of every kind of bird, that's not normal. And so he talks about how, you know, people say that, well, sometimes people will say, well, you know, there's really no such thing as normal because everybody's different and quirky. And he actually finds that insulting, believe it or not, when people say that, because it diminishes the struggles that he goes through every day. When someone who's neurotypical says that they're no different than he is, he gets offended by that. He's like, come spend a day in my head and then tell me that you're not normal.
Right.
So that's where the book title came from.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it definitely has a pop to it, Chasing the Rabbit. So in the book, you share the story of your life and your family, right?
I do, in great detail.
So could you give us a brief overview of your book and where exactly it takes the reader and maybe describe your writing style a bit?
Sure. The book takes you basically from conception, without the details, right through Dylan's 22nd year. And it chronicles the experiences that we had as Dylan was a young boy when he was 2, and my wife was watching some of the neighbors' kids and who happened to be boys. And I came home from work one day and she sat me down and she said, something's not quite right with Dylan. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I don't know, but something's not right. And of course I did the immediate dad response, which was denial. Nah, he's fine. Nothing wrong with my boy. And she said, no, I'm telling you, I don't know what it is. And I said, well, what makes you say that? And she said, when the other boys are here, they're, whether playing blocks or ball or whatever, they're interacting, and he doesn't even seem to notice whether they're even in the room. And it just doesn't seem right to me. She couldn't pinpoint. She had no idea what that was, why it was, but she knew at 2 years old that something was off. And we spent 6 years from that point having no idea what was going on with Dylan and why he behaved the way he did and why he had all these, unbelievable special interests and could memorize, amazing number of facts about whatever it was that he happened to be interested in. And then he would go on to something else and do the same thing with a new topic until he was 8 years old. And he was finally diagnosed with Asperger's. And I tell the whole story of how that happened in the book. And then it goes through all his, rocky middle school was a absolute nightmare. They did a terrible job handling Dylan. And they actually changed his IEP at one point without telling us and threw him into just a complete tailspin. And then it goes through his, high school years and how we handled that and his, struggling with chasing the rabbit and knowing that he wasn't catching it and feeling very basically just invisible is kind of the way I would describe it. He just felt like there was nobody that cared whether he woke up the next morning. And that's a tough place to be. So it goes right through that, high school years, and then into post-high school, and he got in quite a bit of legal trouble and how we handled that. And then I won't tell you the ending, and then it kind of leads into the next chapter of his life. And so my writing style is basically me just talking. And the reason for that is I actually didn't write the book. I recorded almost the whole book. And my now 23-year-old daughter typed it for me. She's actually a law student at Temple and she was in college at the time. So I started this whole journey with the idea that I was going to write a business book. I own a corrugated box company in Biddeford, Maine, southern Maine. And a friend of mine said, if you write a business book and you go into and you get it, in book form, get it published, even if you self-publish it, and you go into a potential client and present the book to them, your credibility goes way up.
Sure.
It doesn't even matter if he says, it doesn't even matter if the book's good. Like, the book can suck. It doesn't even matter. You hand them a book and your credibility goes up. And I thought, you know what? That actually makes sense. So I started this whole thing with a completely selfish intent, which was to make me look good. And as I sat down one day at the computer to try to figure out an outline for this book, I heard a voice that I believe was God. It wasn't audible, but it was so close to audible that I almost turned around. And it said, that's not the book you're supposed to be writing. You're supposed to write a book about Dylan.
Wow.
And like the hairs went up on the back of my neck, and I was like, what the heck was that? And it's the only time in my whole life that I feel like God actually spoke to me and said, that's not the direction that I want you to go. So I started typing, and I typed for about an hour, and I think I got 3 pages done. And I thought to myself, I'm never going to write a book. I just spent an hour writing 3 pages. How am I possibly going to write an actual book? So I kind of put it aside for a while. And then one day I have a little microphone that I do. I have a radio show. And so I had a little microphone that I do my radio show with. And I looked down on it and I thought, well, I wonder if I recorded the book. So I called Mariah and I said, let me ask you a question. I'm thinking about writing a book about Dylan. If I recorded it and emailed it to you, would you transcribe it for me? And she's like, yeah, I'd love to do that. So I would get in the car, and if I had a 45-minute ride to a customer or a half an hour ride to work, I'd grab the microphone, I'd say, okay, third grade. And I would just start talking. And I wrote the whole book I basically wrote almost the entire book from memory. Basically, the only thing I had to go back and look at was the exact, what meds he was on. And so, but the rest of the book I did completely from just off the top of my head. And so it reads that way. It reads, a lot of people will say to me that it reads like you're sitting in my living room and I'm just telling you my life story.
That's incredible.
And yeah, and people seem to really enjoy it. It's been absolutely overwhelming, the response that we've received from this book. It's way beyond, if I never sell another book, if I never do another speaking engagement, it will be probably the single best thing I've ever done in my life, other than marry my wife. So this will be number 2.
Yeah, I'm reading through the testimonials on your website right now. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. It really is. We just spoke a couple of weeks ago at a human resources conference, and so we have 2 presentations that we do. One presentation is kind of the story of our life, and Dylan and I go back and forth and kind of go back and forth telling the stories. And then there's another presentation that we do that's mostly Dylan, and it's his work experience, because he's 25 years old, almost 26, and he's had almost 40 jobs and has been fired from every one of them. And so we've done presentations at Chamber of Commerce events, we spoke at the Texas Department of Labor's annual conference in Houston. We just did a big conference, the Maine Human Resources Conference, and Dylan is unbelievable. He is an absolute rock star up on stage. And people they gave him a standing ovation. They just he has all the experiences and all the feelings that people with Asperger's or autism have, but unlike most of them, he can talk about it. He can analyze it and then tell the story of how he feels and then what that does to him and how he reacts to it. And he does it in a he's funny. He's incredible on stage. He's unbelievable. And so we get these reviews after the presentations, and if we do a small, local gig or something like that, there's always what I call the lingerer. That's the lady or the dad. The lady or the dad that kind of stands in the back and waits till we're all done signing books, and then they come up when everybody's done, and then they tell me what they're going through, and that usually takes a while because they're the ones in the room that are having the hardest time, and I always feel like they're the ones I'm there for. Like the lingerer is the reason I'm there. If there's 6 people or 600 people in the room, there's somebody in that room that God put me there to talk to, and it's usually the lingerer. And I'm actually getting to the point where I can tell who the lingerer is about halfway through the presentation, because they're crying and wiping their eyes and nodding a lot. And so I usually will kind of in my head kind of look around and I'll be like, "There's my lingerer tonight."
I love that you have a name for them.
So it's pretty fun. Yeah, and so it's pretty funny, and the responses that we get are just incredible. I mean, we just got the official feedback from this human resources conference we went to a couple of weeks ago, and we got all the write-ups of the comment cards. And one lady said she went home, told her husband all about it. She always kind of felt like there was something off with him. She went and they bought a book, and they basically self-diagnosed him with high-functioning autism. And she wrote on her thing, "You changed my you saved my marriage."
Wow.
And I mean, it's just really powerful stuff. And I've had dads come up to me and tell me that I completely changed the relationship with their son. People tell me that I've changed the whole dynamic of their family from after reading my book, or they gave it to their parents, and now their parents finally. We did a presentation in West Palm Beach year and a half ago, and this guy, I didn't even see this, but about halfway through the thing, he got up and left, and then he came back, and when we were done and we were up front signing books, he went over to my father, who happened to be there.
Okay.
And he was crying. He was like, crying his eyes out, put his head on my father's shoulder and was crying. And he said, "I've been so mean to my grandson.
Ooh.
I've said things to my son like, all he needs is a good kick in the butt, or, you just got to discipline him more. And he's just like your grandson." And I didn't understand it. And he was like 80 years old. And my father said, there's still time to mend that relationship. And so that's just awesome. It's just, I can't even describe how good that feels. And when I look back and I think that, I was going to write a business book, and now I look at what this book has done for people, it's just great. And
yeah, just the impact you're having.
It's just, I sell boxes for a living. That's what I do. I own a corrugated box company. And, they talk about when you're in your late 40s, as there's a book out there called Halftime. And it talks about that this is kind of the halftime of your life. And so you got to decide, okay, what are you going to do with the second half? And so I'm 47 years old, and, I kind of got to the point where I was thinking, if I die tomorrow, are they going to say, he made a lot of boxes? That's not really a legacy that gets me terribly excited. I love my business. I love my job. I love the people I work with, but I don't want that, I didn't want that to be my legacy. And the fact that if this book has done what it's done, like I said, if I never sell another book, it's far exceeded my expectations.
Wow.
So it's great.
Well, I'm so glad you went after this goal, and it's just really wonderful the amount of people you've been able to impact through the speaking, consulting. And so Dylan has kind of sprung forward with a lot of new entrepreneurial efforts. Have they been since the release of the book, or has he always kind of been moving towards this after having all that prior work experience as an employee?
No, this is all from the book. He never, he kept it all pretty close to the vest until this book came out. And so it's amazing to see him be so open. I mean, when he gets up on stage and we get done speaking and the Q&A starts, I could basically leave the room at that point. They just want to pick Dylan's brain and talk to Dylan. And they ask him anything, and he doesn't hold back. And of course, he doesn't have much of a filter, so he will say whatever's on his mind. And he has some very strong opinions about things and about the way things that could have been done better. So it's such a joy to watch him and interact with the audience. And like we were at a conference in Cleveland, and a woman raised her hand and she said, my son is 10 and he's really into fire alarms and smoke alarms, which most 10-year-olds obviously are not into. And so he doesn't have a lot of friends. She said, does it get easier? And I held my breath because I'm like, oh my gosh, if he tells her that it doesn't get easier, she's gonna leave here with no hope at all.
Yeah.
And you could tell she was, she got emotional just asking the question. And then I thought, is he going to just tell her what she wants to hear? And then I thought that thought came and went very quickly because Dylan just doesn't have that. That just doesn't happen. Dylan doesn't tell people unless he's on a job interview, he doesn't just tell people what they want to hear. And so I was I was anxious for, a brief moment. I kind of panicked like, oh my gosh, this lady could go home very, very discouraged. And Dylan was great. He said, I'll be honest with you. When you're 10, there's nothing good about being different. It's all about conforming and being like everybody else, and it's really hard. And we can water it down any way we want. If you're 10 and you're different, it's not good. And it gets a little better in high school, but not a whole lot. But when you get into your, he said, tell him, which was great because he was like talking to the kid through the mom. He said, tell him that when he gets into his 20s, it actually kind of goes the other way. People are kind of tired of the same old. And if you are interesting and have character, you're more interesting as an adult. And so he said, tell him to hang in there. And I was almost in tears. I was like, that was the perfect answer. He didn't BS her and say, he didn't BS her and say, oh, don't worry, it's all going to be fine. He said, no, it's tough. I'm not going to lie to you. It's tough. It's not easy, but it will get better. And so from that, Dylan has started this consulting, we call it a coaching service because, he's not a consultant. He's not a counselor. He's a coach. And so we call it Dylan's Coaching Services. And basically, he just talks to people. He does it by Skype or does it by phone or, FaceTime or whatever, might work for them. And it's right on our website. If you go to our website, chasingtherabbit.org, you can get all the information about it.
Okay.
And it's great. And what Dylan says is, I can't fix everybody. I can't, if you're really socially awkward, I can't make you cool. I can't do that by over a phone call, a couple of phone calls. But what I can do is a lot of times people with autism we understand the what. We understand what's happening to us. We just don't understand the why. And the why changes everything. So I can explain to them the why. And hopefully they'll realize that they're not alone, that other people have been through this, and they can understand a little bit more of the why. And he talks about that in his presentation as well, because a lot of times, especially kids with a high-functioning autism, they're trying to fit in, they don't fit in, and they end up getting very frustrated, and it results in what appears to be anger or hostility. And what Dylan will tell you is there's plenty of times in my life, and you read in the book, where I seemed really angry. I wasn't angry. I was frustrated. I was frustrated with my life. I was frustrated that I didn't understand what was going on. I was frustrated with the way teachers were treating me or classmates were treating me. And it manifested itself in anger because that's the only thing I knew what to do with. I didn't know what else to do with it. And so he's incredibly insightful.
I was just going to say that.
He's just, and there's some stories in the book about these kind of things that he comes up with, and he still does, that he's just really insightful. And in fact, I think this is one of the videos on our YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and type in Derek and Dylan Volk, you'll find us. And, he talks about this whole idea of being normal. And we went to this conference in Boston, and somebody raised his hand and said, I don't think there's anything, like I said at the beginning, I don't think there's any such thing as normal. We're all quirky and everybody has their own idiosyncrasies. And Dylan said, he actually raised his hand and said, that's BS. And he didn't say BS. Wow. And there were like 200 people in the room. And he said, but he was 16. And he said, the difference between us, he said, everybody's different, everybody's quirky. But the difference between them and us is that their quirkiness and their idiosyncrasies fall within the range that society accepts as normal. And we fall outside that range. And that's the difference. And, we walked out and I'm like, Dylan, that was brilliant. Where'd you come up with that? He goes, I don't know. I just came up with it. And then, and then he says, I probably have 100 of those profound thoughts a day.
Well, I'm sure he got a lot of people thinking in that conference. So
he does. He always gets people thinking. There's no question about that. So, but it's been an interesting road, and it's been a tough road. I mean, he's made some pretty big mistakes, and he's got in some pretty serious legal trouble, and he's learned from every one of them, we hope. And sometimes they're just mistakes that he made because he just got frustrated or didn't understand the situation he was in, and he's very they're very vulnerable to be manipulated. And then sometimes he just makes dumb decisions, and part of the maturity, it's a developmental disability. So even though he's 25 years old on the outside, he's probably more like 16, 17 maturity wise. And so he's getting there. He's getting there, but it's a process. So if you're listening and you've got the kid who's 18 years old, but he acts like he's 14, don't worry. When he's hang in there, because when he's 23, he'll act like he's closer to 17, 18. But eventually, we hope he gets there.
Yeah, that's hopeful. So, Derek, would you mind actually sharing an example or two of those types of legal issues that Dylan had gotten into, or are they in the book?
Yeah, they're in the book. He's got in more since the book came out, unfortunately. But he, I'll give you an example. He was in a program in Utah, and he'd only been there about a month or so, and they were having a discussion during the day about some kind of bombing or something that had happened. And so later that night, he texted one of the guys that was his counselor in the program, and he said, "There's a bomb in the building." Oh. And he thought that he knew that was Dylan. Dylan thought he knows it's me, and then I'm just joking around. And so he texted him back, and then Dylan texted him back. And so Dylan this whole time is thinking, this is just a joke. We're just kind of goofing off here. But the guy, the counselor, to no fault of his own, thought it was real. And so he got concerned and called the police. Oof. So the police show up. Sure. And Dylan comes downstairs and says, "What's going on?" And they said, "Somebody called in a bomb threat." And Dylan said, "I was just kidding around." Ugh. Boom. I mean, he basically just admitted that he did it. And they cuffed him, and they brought him to jail. And they charged him with a felony and $10,000 bail. And it was all because he didn't understand a social situation. He thought that, so get this, Dylan was using like a Google phone number that you can do online or something. And so because Dylan's from Maine, and the whole state of Maine has one area code. Okay. So that tells you how many people we have here. So with one area code in the whole state of Maine, 207, Dylan did this Google number, and it was a 206 number. So he thought, since Maine is 207 and this was 206, he would know it was him. That was his thought process. That was his thought process. And so he comes downstairs and basically said, "Oh, I was just kidding around," and boom, they arrested him. So he ended up, thousands of dollars, and lawyers later, he ended up with a, misdemeanor, and, they understood that he never, and they asked the counselor, "Do you want us to search the building?" And he said, "No, it's just he has autism and he just misunderstood the situation," but they arrested him anyway. Wow. So it's crazy stuff like that you just, and there's a lot of that going, I've heard a lot of stories like that around the country of kids who get with autism, that get in trouble because they don't understand social situations, or they get pulled over by a policeman. Definitely. And because they don't have autism, they don't look them in the eye, so the cop thinks they're lying, and it's a problem. And I've had a couple of guests on my show, my radio show, which is called the Derek Volk Show, who, that's what they do. They go around and talk to police departments and attorneys and judges and explain autism to them. Excellent. So that Yeah, it's great. It's terrific. And there needs to be more of that because they don't understand. And actually, in the next town over here that we live in, they just started a program, and I don't know if it's a national thing or not, called the Yellow Dot Program. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but you put this sticker with just a yellow circle on the back of your car, and it alerts the policeman that there's an issue with the driver.
Oh.
And so when the cop pulls you over, and if he sees a yellow dot, he goes to the passenger side and asks to look in the glove compartment. And in the glove compartment is a yellow envelope, plastic yellow envelope, and inside that envelope it says, Dylan has autism. And these are some of the ways it may show itself. And it's a terrific program. I wish they had it in every single town in America, but I think it's growing.
Maybe they're working on that.
It's a great idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great idea. So I should get them. I'll introduce them to you, and you can have them on your podcast.
Thank you. Yeah. I actually have a few other upcoming guests that are working in that space as well. So some that are designing programs for police force, training them about autism, and then a family who's developed a scanning system with QR codes to help individuals on the spectrum who might be lost or missing temporarily in order to find them.
Interesting.
Yeah, so those things will be awesome. Coming up in future episodes.
I'll be listening.
Great.
Yeah, that's great. I'll subscribe to your podcast, and then I'll have them on. I'll steal the guests and have them on my show.
Not a problem. Yep, we'll steal from each other.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Do you typically have autism-focused guests on your show, or is it more broad?
Pretty much, it's broad. It actually started as a business talk show, and then after the book came out, I was going to these autism conferences. I would meet people, and I'd be like, "Hey, you should come on my show. This is really good stuff. What you're doing here." And I just started kind of expanding with that, and now the show is basically anybody I'm interested in.
Nice.
It's if I meet you and I think you're interesting, I'll invite you on my show. Yeah, it's totally wide open, and I'm meeting people all the time because I have a business in Maine, so I have a lot of customers here, and my wife's a state senator, so I meet people through her. She's always texting me while she's in Augusta saying, "Hey, you should have this person on the show. They're doing some good stuff." So, I don't seem to ever have a lack of guests.
Yeah, your book pretty far out, I hear. That's fun. Yeah. So aside from your own book, Chasing the Rabbit, do you recommend any other resources, maybe other podcasts or sources for families that they might want to look into to learn more during the transition years and adult years? So things that might have helped you and your family?
Well, I don't have anything necessarily that helped us, unfortunately, because there just wasn't a whole lot available to us, which is part of what the book is. How many people just didn't really have any idea how to help Dylan. But I have since then, I've met a lot of people. I had a guy on my show. His name is Harold Reitman. I think he's from Fort Lauderdale area, and he wrote a book called Asper Tools.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great. It's called Asper Tools.
Great.
And,
okay.
It's like understanding Asperger's, and it's a very good book. I remember reading that one thing, like highlighting the crap out of it. This is good stuff. This is good stuff. So that was a really good book, and so there's some good stuff out there, and there's a lot more people out there now that are really trying to understand autism, and that's great. I mean, when I go to these conferences, and sometimes there's a whole room full of educators, and I'll just thank them. I say, thank you for taking time out of your life or day to come and learn more about autism, because when Dylan went through this, nobody knew anything, and it was really hard.
Yeah.
And so the fact that, you're here to learn more, I can just tell you, that you will make a difference in people's lives. And that's really important. And, it's tough. And there are still schools. I find it amazing. I actually spoke at 2 local speaking engagements here in Maine last year, and they were literally 2 towns away. And I went, and they were within a few days of each. They were within a few days of each other. The first one I went to, all they did is tell me how awful the school district was. They wouldn't help their kids. They won't do anything. They're just, they refuse to give them any services, on and on and on. Then like a few days later, literally within the same week, I went to and spoke at a middle school 2 towns away. And all the parents could do was rave about the school system, what a great job they do. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
Really?
And it really highlighted for me how important it starts at the top. You need to have people, principals and special ed directors and school board people who are willing to help these kids. And if you don't have that at the top, it just filters right down through. And it can be very, very frustrating. And I feel awful for these people. I spoke at a conference in New York, and this girl, I call her a girl. She's a woman, a young woman. I guess I'm getting old because I see a 27-year-old as a girl. But okay. I saw this young woman, and she had a 10-year-old, and she couldn't have been more than 27, 28 years old. And she said, my son spends all his time in front of a computer and has no friends, and basically described a classic Asperger kid. Mm-hmm. And she said, and the school told me that he's too smart to have autism.
Ooh.
And they're not going to give him, and they refuse to give him any services. No, they would do nothing. They did nothing for him. Huh. And this woman, this young woman has no resources. She lived in the Bronx, and she can't go hire a lawyer or a private advocate. So she, what's she going to do? And it just drives me insane when I hear stories like that. That's why I always tell people, when you go to an IEP meeting, bring somebody that, if you can't hire a private advocate, bring somebody who likes your kid, but not that much. They could take them or leave them. Don't bring your mother. Don't bring your sister or your best friend, because they love your kid. And rule number 1 in any negotiation is whoever's more emotionally involved loses. That's negotiating 101. And so, if you go buy a car, if you really want that car, guess what? You're going to end up paying more than you should for that car because you really want the car.
Yeah, they read it on your face.
If you go to buy a car and if you go buy a car and you don't really care if you buy that car or not, or you could buy it from this dealer or that dealer, but that guy's trying to meet his quota, guess what? You're going to get a better deal, because whoever's more emotionally involved in the result loses. And when you go into that school, there is a 100% chance that you are more emotionally involved in your kid than they are. Guaranteed. It's never not happened that a parent goes in and the school people are more emotionally involved in the kid than the parents are. And so they immediately start out with an advantage. And then they bring in the special ed director and the special ed teacher and the social worker and the principal and the janitor and the lunch lady, and they pack the room so it's intimidating as heck for parents. And it just becomes overwhelming, and they can get away with whatever they want. And so I always say, bring in a neighbor, bring in a coworker or something, someone who can listen without any emotional attachment to what they're saying and say, well, that doesn't really make sense, or they can take notes for you, because it's very overwhelming. It can be very overwhelming in these situations. So that's my little school speech.
Yeah. Thanks, Derek. Good tip for IEP meetings.
Yeah.
Okay. So since we're getting close to the time when we're going to have to start wrapping up, I wanted to be sure to share with the audience how they can reach out to you, ways they can follow you and Dylan. So would you mind sharing some of those, please?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. First of all, you can go to our website, chasingtherabbit.org, and you can access pretty much everything from there. You can access Dylan's coaching services, our YouTube channel. Just go to the speaking tab. You'll see all the places we've done our presentations. You can see some of the presentations on video. There's an amazing presentation that Dylan and my daughter Mariah did last year at the Maine Autism Conference called Autism and the Sibling Relationship.
Ooh.
And so if you're out there and you have a kid with autism and a sibling, I recommend that they watch it, because Mariah and Dylan do a great job talking about that relationship and how it's changed over the years, and they're both adults now, and they're funny, and it's just a terrific presentation. So you can go to our YouTube channel, type in Derek and Dylan Volk on YouTube, and you can get us there. And of course, I'm on Facebook. You can hit me up on Facebook if you want, Derek Volk, and I live in Maine, and there's usually a picture of my wife and me on the profile, or maybe one of my kids. And then our book is on Facebook is Chasing the Rabbit Book. So if you go facebook.com/Chasing the Rabbit Book,
okay,
you can follow us on Facebook.
Wonderful.
But we are we're all over the internet.
Yeah. Okay, and we'll be sure to include all of those links on your show notes page too. So we'll have everything easily accessible in one spot. So even that video of Dylan and Mariah and your social media links, all that stuff. So the audience can go directly to your page and then see all that in one spot.
Awesome. I think you're doing a great service here with this podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And you as well. And I mean, the amount of people you've been able to reach so far with your book, the number of places. Before we started this interview, I think you told me the number of speaking engagements that you've had. Was that since the release of the book?
Just shy of 100.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, since the release of the book, just shy of 100. So we'll probably, by the time this airs, we'll probably hit the 100th presentation.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's just it's a lot of fun. I get to travel with Dylan, which is always an adventure, but I get to travel with Dylan and spend some time with him, and that's been a really good thing too, because it's been a strained relationship over the years, and so it's now that he's an adult, it's nice to be able to spend some time with him and to actually genuinely like him, which honestly for a lot of years I didn't like him, and that'll tell you, that's a little sneak preview on how honest I am in the book. I mean, I loved him. I love him. He's my son, but I didn't really like him. I didn't like being with him. I didn't like spending time with him. He was not really, for a lot of years, he wasn't very pleasant to be around. And that's hard when you don't like your kid. And so it's nice now I remember the first time that he was living in Florida, and I went down to visit him for a few days, and then I left. And it was the first time that I actually was sad to not be with Dylan, to leave him. And I wanted to spend more time with him. And I called Amy, and I was all teary and at the airport and going, I actually enjoyed my time with him and I don't want to leave. And it was such a great feeling, Yeah. So it's nice. But yeah. I didn't have that feeling when he was 12. So if you're listening and your kid's 12 and he's driving you crazy, hang in there, because at some point he'll be easier to live with and to spend time with.
Yeah. Well, raw and honest, that's what you are, Derek Volk.
Yeah. Yep.
So thank you so much for coming on the show today and for sharing about Chasing the Rabbit with our audience. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I look forward to hopefully meeting you someday.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
You too.
Hey, Quality of Lifers. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Autism Quality of Life podcast. I hope you enjoyed the interview today with Derek Volk. As always, you can find the show notes for today's episode over on our website at www.autismqualityoflife.com. There you can find all of the links and resources that Derek shared with us, including ways to buy his book and the video of Dylan and Mariah that he referenced, along with other links to content that Derek shared. If you've been enjoying these episodes, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and it would be wonderful if you could leave us a review on iTunes. All right, thank you so much for listening, and hope to catch you in our social media communities on Facebook and Twitter to connect with you there. Enjoy the rest of your day.